Welcome to CivilNet. On June 7, about 54 million Turkish voters headed to the polls to take part in a critical parliamentary election. What has happened is nothing short of amazing. With the AKP, the ruling Justice and Development Party, not being able to secure a simple majority for the first time since 2002 when it first rose to power. Now, joining me from Istanbul to talk about the elections and the results is journalist Stephen Starr, who covers Turkey for the Irish Times. Stephen, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Do you think it is fair to say that these elections, or the voters actually, delivered a severe blow to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's ruling AKP party?
I think it does, and I think it delivers two distinct blows. I think, first of all, as president of the Turkish Republic, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is not a member of the AK party, in fact. And of course, his campaigning and his rhetoric and his actions very much give the sense that he is still part of that party, a party that he helped found in 2001, 2002. Secondly, it's a huge blow for the AK party itself. Losing a quarter of its parliamentary seats in the last general election in 2011, it got close to 50% of the popular vote. And last night we're looking at something between, I think, 41, 42% as a final count. So the plans and the steamroller, essentially, that the AK party had been in action and operating at election time for the past 12 years has now shuddered to a stop, you can say. In the past three elections, they've won by increasingly large majorities in the parliament. And now what you've seen is them, as I say, lose a huge number of seats in parliament. But more importantly, they've lost the sense of invincibility when it comes to election time. And then our next step are going to be very interesting indeed. Again, separately, both for President Erdogan and also for the AK party itself.
Right. And I think also that we need to mention is the fact that they were hoping not only for a simple majority, but for a supermajority so that they could then push through a referendum granting more powers to Erdogan, because as it stands now, his role remains symbolic. Is that not the case?
Yeah. I think it was very unlikely that they were actually looking for a two-thirds majority in parliament, which would need them, I think, get 367 seats or more than that, in fact. It's something around 367 seats. I don't think anyone believed that actually would happen. What they did think, I think, is that they would get 330 seats, which would allow them to push forward a referendum on whether or not they should change Turkey's constitutional makeup from a parliamentary system to a presidential system. Now, not only did they not reach 330, or they didn't reach 312, which is what they got in the last general election, they're down somewhere around 257, I believe, which is a huge blow to all their endeavors and their goals for the past 5 or 6 years. You know, they've had a number of plans in place through their entire time in power since 2002, and this is the first time that one of those plans has completely gone off the rails. And of course, that plan was to change the constitutional makeup to a presidential system, which of course would allow Recep Tayyip Erdogan to legally and constitutionally rule the country.
Okay, so now we're looking at a coalition government. But let's, if we can, just talk about the Kurdish factor for a second. The HDP co-chair Selahattin Demirtas, a very charismatic, dynamic young leader, was formed only 3 years ago, despite the many divisions within the Kurdish population in Turkey. And they were able to get, I believe, almost 13% of the vote, crossing the 10% threshold that's required for parties to enter parliament. Talk to me, if you will. I mean, they are the biggest winner, along with MHP, most probably, in these elections. What was it that enabled the Kurdish vote to get out in the numbers that it did?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think anywhere in world politics, the rise of the HDP is an interesting phenomenon. what was really interesting was that one of the first public statements made by a HDP member was that we understand and we realize that we're in parliament on borrowed votes. And that means that the HDP understands that a lot of the people who voted for them did so in a protest capacity, in the sense that they wanted to vote for the HDP because they did not want the AK party from instituting a presidential system and changing the constitution. And also, same for the opposition. A lot of people where I live in Istanbul would have been and still are CHP supporters. But I think a lot of people grew frustrated by the CHP in the fact that they continue to essentially just put out new rhetoric, which is the same kind of talk all the time. They've been in opposition for a very, very long time. I think a lot of people said, okay, well, you know what, let's give the HDP a chance and see what they're like and see what happens. Now, the other sector of Turkish society, of course, that would support, that did support, in fact, the HDP yesterday are the Kurdish minority. And you have Kurds, of course, predominantly in southeast Turkey, but also in a host of Istanbul suburbs. You know, once upon a time, Istanbul was a much smaller city, and you could project that it would go for one party or another. Now it's changing because it's grown so big, and in the suburbs, you have these large populations of Kurds, people who have, in fact, migrated from the southeast of the country and set up families. And they're now an important factor, I think, in Turkish politics. So particularly when you take into account the bombing of a HDP rally in Diyarbakir last Friday night that killed 2 people and injured hundreds of more, a lot of Kurds, a lot of conservative Kurds who would have beforehand voted for the AK party and had voted for the AK party over a number of elections, I imagine decided that they said, okay, you know, this political violence and this attacking of the HDP is a dangerous thing, and we want to give the HDP a chance and see if they can get into parliament and see if they can shake up Turkish politics.
That leads me to my next question, Stephen. Talk to me, if you will, about the actual campaign itself. Aside from the bombing in Diyarbakir on Friday, there were other incidents, I believe in Adana and Mersin, of the HDP headquarters being bombed. Was the election campaign a level or equal playing field for all parties involved, or did AKP in fact use all the power levers it had at its availability?
No, it was nothing like a level playing ground. And we don't need to speak about the political violence itself. And you mentioned how a bus driver was shot dead during an attack in Adana, but driver of a bus on a campaign vehicle. But we don't need to speak about that. What we should, I think, in fact, more focus on is the level of attention and the Turkish media gives towards the AK party and Tayyip Erdogan. I mean, I was here on Friday night, and there was an hour-long interview with Tayyip Erdogan, who is, as I say again, the president of the republic. He should not be, he's constitutionally bound from speaking about politics. But he was given this long interview in which, you know, the merits of what the AK party had been doing, the new construction projects and infrastructure projects were broadcasted, and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, at the same time, you had the bombing in Diyarbakir, which killed 2 people. So you can really get a sense of the deep political influence the media has, I think, on people's lives in terms of the political influence the government has. And that runs across a huge number of media outlets. Now, of course, the print media is divided in a much more, less kind of more of a spread out way, in that there are a number of opposition papers also. Those opposition papers do not intentionally support the HDP. The HDP is such a new party that it has no political history, really. So it doesn't have a sense of established backed media organizations. But as you mentioned, there was nothing close to a level playing field in these elections. It hasn't been that way for a number of elections now. But what's going to be very interesting looking forward is how the government reacts to this shuttering loss Of course, they're still the largest party in parliament, but this is really thrown a spanner in the works for them. And how they're supporting media organizations react, because to join the two issues together, a lot of people believe that the rhetoric used by the pro-government columnists and writers and media organizations, in fact, in part contribute to the actual occurrence of political violence, the attacks on the bus drivers and the attack on the rally in Diyarbakir last Friday. So they're not unrelated. And how that manifests going forward is a real issue, I think.
Okay, so we talked about some of the factors for the loss of votes for the AKP. We spoke about some of the biggest losers and the biggest winners in the election. Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu during the campaign had said that if the AKP does not secure a majority in Turkish parliament, that he would resign. And yet yesterday, as is the tradition or custom, it seems, in Turkish politics, that following an election, every party claims victory. And that's what he was doing yesterday. But do you think that he will stay true to his word?
They had to come out and show a positive face. I mean, they are still, as I say, the strongest political party in Turkey. A lot of people support the AK party. If you had to walk around Istanbul or any major city, I think, outside of Izmir, and speak to a couple of dozen people, you would find, I think, that the majority of people support the AK party, and that they say that they've done tremendous things for the country, improving the infrastructure and increasing wages for people and whatnot, and also the fact that Tayyip Erdogan is quite a charismatic speaker resonates with a lot of, I suppose you can say, rural-based Turks and even working-class Turks also. He's got quite a charisma, and that works for a lot of people. To say that it was a victory speech, I mean, they of course, the AK party of course will argue that they won. Internally, of course, though, they will be going through something of a post-mortem, I imagine. Now the next move is to figure out what to do from here. They have been a very steely and well-organized political machine for the last 12 years. They are one of the best political parties, I would argue, in the world at getting out the vote, at encouraging people to view things from their point of view, and to convincing people to vote for them. But also they've got real factual, real things to back up their votes. They point to things such as the Marmaray train system that goes underneath the Bosphorus in Istanbul. There's a new fast train linking Ankara and Istanbul, and another from Ankara to Konya. There are, the infrastructure, transportation system in Istanbul is far, far better than what it was before they came to power. So these are all real things that they can point to. And there are real things that people can see every day in their daily lives that the AK party, in a sense, we can say, is responsible for putting there. But as I say, internally, they will be going through a very, very different set of inquisitions, I guess we could say. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of if there's going to be changes among the positions of the party itself. We do know that the Minister for the Economy is leaving because he served 2 terms. But Davutoglu, the Prime Minister, you get a sense from him, at least, that he's becoming increasingly like President Erdogan in the sense of how he speaks in public. Once upon a time, he was a much more conciliatory speaker, whereas now, it almost seems like he's becoming a shadow of Tayyip Erdogan.
Right. Interesting times for sure in Turkey. From our vantage point here in Armenia, another significant thing about these elections was that there were 4 Christians elected, 3 Armenians and an Assyrian and a Yazidi. How do you account for that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's to do with the HDP party's internal makeup, in that they allocate 50% of their membership to women, and that they have set out from the beginning to be a party of the minority. Now, the HDP is, it's going to be very interesting what happens to the HDP, because they are rooted, obviously, in the Kurdish minority of Turkey, but they're also trying to set up a position for minorities, for secular city-based people, to present a sense that we are a modern face of Turkey, that we are a modern political party, and that you can vote for us. So, in a sense, they've got two, I won't say opposing sides, but they've got the traditional rural Kurdish vote behind them, which I would imagine, my own point of view, is their solid base. And on that, on the opposite side as well, they have the kind of the secular urban crowd, people in Ankara and Izmir, in Istanbul, who are looking for any alternative to the AK party, and also an alternative to the CHP, which, as I say, they have seen do little or nothing in politics except make promises for the last, since the 1990s. So a lot of people, particularly these urban secularists, we can call them, will be very interested to see what the HDP does next. And one point that really that a lot of people, that section of society kind of gravitate to, is the fact that the HDP doesn't use negative politics and negative campaigning to get its point across. Now, the AK party, a core element of its electioneering and campaigning was to single out the HDP and single out many other parties with negative connotations. As I'm sure you know, there was a reference by Tayyip Erdogan to a number of Turkish minorities and portraying them in a very negative light. This is something that a lot of Turks are sick of hearing, and I think they found it was refreshing. Some people I spoke to at least found it refreshing that the HDP ran a very clean campaign, didn't single out anybody, didn't resort to dirty tactics, and we'll have to see what happens going forward. I think it's likely, a lot of people are saying here that it's possible and even probable that there will be snap elections before the end of the year, because forming a coalition government looks like it's going to be very difficult.
Tricky for sure. Getting back to what you were saying about the HDP and the way they were running their campaign, even after the bombing in Diyarbakir, Demirtas, was calling for peace, for calm, and he was saying yesterday after the results were in that HDP is Turkey and Turkey is HDP. So certainly a lot of refreshing conciliatory terminology coming from the HDP. Just as a final question, we've been following the international news, Turkish news about the elections, and I think it was Politico that wrote that there are certain things to take away from these elections. First of all, that the tide has turned against Erdogan, that democracy actually works, even for the Kurds in Turkey, and that this might very possibly help end Turkey's PKK insurgency. Do you see this as being a factor as a result of these elections?
No, I agree in part on that question. I don't think for a second that the AK party is finished. They will come back. As I say, they're still the leading party in Turkey. They have huge support among important sections of society. They're not finished by half, and they will come back and they will be strong again. But I think this is good for Turkey, and it's good for them also that this has happened to them, that they have had a reality check. Mm-hmm. I think, of course, it's very good for Turkey's Kurds, the Kurdish minority, that they finally have a political voice in Turkish politics. This is something that has unfortunately been lacking and absent for decades and decades. So this is a huge deal in terms of human rights and in terms of democratic values that Turkey hopes to uphold. This is a huge, the world should be very, very positive about the fact that there is Kurdish representation in the Turkish parliament.
Right. Well, I think we can all agree on that. Such a large minority in the country, and for the first time, as you said, having a political voice in the country's political system. Stephen Starr, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you probably haven't slept as you were following and covering the events with the election. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for the illumination and the news from your own perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was journalist Stephen Starr. He covers Turkey for the Irish Times. Stay with CivilNet.